The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable! Allez, c'est parti! Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel. Non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome to Sing With Your Feet. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. On this podcast, we talk about how we can live our lives in such a way that we can die without regrets. Is that dark? It might sound a little dark, but as we have heard before on this podcast, one of the things that people who are dying say that they regret the most about their lives is that they didn't live according to their values. So this fairy godmother's goal is to sprinkle a little bit of fairy dust, just enough, so that our Cinderella will be able to articulate what she wants for her life, articulate what her values are, and maybe even develop a plan to live according to those values. I want Cinderella, when she arrives at the end of her life, to know that she made every effort to arrive there without regrets. Lately, we have been talking about a topic that is synonymous with values, and that is the topic of virtue. Virtues are values as character traits over which we have a tiny bit of agency. There are virtues which are external expressions, like creativity, industriousness, orderliness, serenity, or affection. These are virtues that can be seen in how we behave, and these are the easiest to influence. These are choices that we make. We can choose industriousness, for example, by choosing to buckle down and get some housework done instead of watching the latest season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Or we can choose serenity in the face of an unsettling situation by choosing to maintain a calm demeanor. Then there are virtues which are more like a state of mind: acceptance, curiosity, initiative, kindness. These state of mind virtues are the thoughts or mindsets that influence how we make decisions. For example, a mindset of acceptance is what will help us be receptive to people who are different from us, and a mindset of curiosity keeps us engaged with the world and continually seeking to know new things. Initiative is the mindset that will, in the end, help me put away that pile of laundry before sitting down with Mrs. Maisel. Initiative is knowing that I just need to get started. A state of mind can be a hard thing to change, but it can be done. And I like to think that it can be done by consistently engaging in behaviors, that is, the external expressions we talked about a minute ago. Those things that are related to the states of mind. Consistent effort brings consistent reward, and consistent reward can help change our mind. Then there are the attitudes of the heart: courage, justice, joy, simplicity, wisdom, to name a few. These are built into who we are. And I think that the more these are present in our lives, the closer we are to finding true happiness. I think it's possible to grow in these virtues, starting with the outer expression level decisions we make, which will eventually become thought patterns and mindsets, which will eventually impact us on a heart level. I say it's possible to grow in these virtues because I don't think that any one of us will ever be perfect. I know I will never be perfect. It seems like I make one really good virtuous decision, and I can be happy about it and think I've made progress in, frugality, for example. And then the next minute, I lose my patience and realize how much progress I have yet to make in other areas. But as we said last week, we need to hold onto those good moments of progress and to celebrate them, because they will help us keep some positive outlook on our lives. Last week, I talked about how I thought that the pursuit of virtue was a boon to having a great sex life. And if you didn't hear last week's episode, you might want to check it out. This week, I want to talk about how virtue can help us in our relationship with our stuff, specifically the idea of novelty. I have proposed here on the podcast that we have 19 circles that make up this big, beautiful Venn diagram of our lives. These circles are overarching themes that represent different areas of our lives in which we can make progress, and sometimes these themes overlap in different, sometimes unexpected ways. In one episode a long time ago, I talked about how the themes of sexuality and parenting overlap, for example. Well, today I want to talk about the overlap of the themes of contentment and personal style. Contentment is broadly what I call my relationship with my stuff, be it dishes, a piano, or flower pots. Personal style is about how I present myself to the world, and it has a part of it which is very much about clothes, therefore stuff. As you may remember from earlier episodes of the podcast, after a lifetime of being a clutter collector, I am something of an amateur declutterer, and I have lots of opinions about how the things that we actually wear and those things that we choose to keep in our closets, even though we don't wear them, how those things reveal a lot about how we feel about where we are in our lives right now and what we want for our lives. My relationship with stuff is complicated by the fact that I love pretty things, and I am an inveterate coveter. I see something, anything, that I think is pretty, and I start scheming to figure out how I can obtain this pretty thing. To be fair, I've gotten better about this over the last few years, but for a very long time, this was simply how I managed my self-esteem issues. A lot of people who overshop find it simply easier to buy something new than to take on our self-esteem issues. So we end up with overfull closets and linen closets and more fancy throw pillows than we could ever possibly use in 10 lifetimes. What I know to be true about my relationship with my stuff is that new stuff never stays new for long, and that initial spark of joy that I felt at first, it inevitably wears off. So whether we are talking about that adorable lemon motif wrap top that I spied in a shop window yesterday, or that 1950s tea set with the fairy tale motif that I found at a thrift store, I know for a fact that at some point, probably not very far in the future, were I to bring those items home, they will no longer bring me the same spark of joy. No matter how much I swear to myself that this is the last thing I will ever buy, because this is it, I have finally found the one thing that will make my life complete, I have no control over the fact that once this item is on its way to my home, it will not be new for long. So let's get philosophical for a second. How long is something new? I can't remember if I ever told you this story before, but here goes. I was working my first real grown-up job. I had just bought my first pair of real grown-up heels from a real grown-up shoe store, not Payless Shoes, where I had always gone before. These shoes were black leather pumps with this adorable black bow over the toe. They were so pretty and elegant that I could have worn them till the day I died. But on the first day that I wore them, I was like floating on air, there in my expensive new shoes. I took the bus home, and when I stepped off the bus, I stepped directly into fresh concrete. My husband tried so hard to fix up those shoes for me again, but those beautiful brand new shoes were ruined. And with them went my fantasy of wearing them until the day I died. They never got a chance to get scuffed for the first time, or for the heel to break off, or for the black leather to stain the heels of my pantyhose. I still think about those shoes. They are eternally new in my mind. But the question remains, how long do we consider something new? The car that I currently have is a Ford Focus station wagon in bright red. When I bought this car, the very first time we drove it, it got nicked by a rock that flew up from the road. We heard it happen. We did everything we could to fix that nick, but we knew. We just knew that it was there. It seems like I have a lot of stories like this. It sounds like I am not the kind of person who should ever have something new, ever. How many times can you drive a car and still consider it new, even if it doesn't have that little nick on it? We know that it immediately loses value once we drive it off the lot, but what is the measure of it being new? Is it a function of miles, months, new car smell, number of times that you sat down behind the wheel? Or what if I were to actually purchase that beautiful lemon motif wrap top with lace sleeves? How many times can I wear it and still consider it new? Is it new until the first time I wash it? Or is it new until the time I accidentally leave it in the washing machine too long and decide not to rerun the machine to get those little wrinkles out? Is that vintage tea set new until I chip a saucer? Or until I decide to let them air dry instead of carefully drying them with a dish towel and putting them away immediately? Or until I let the dishes sit too long before washing them and one gets a little weird stain in the bottom? Like we said last week about happiness being idiosyncratic and a personal experience, so is our definition of newness. But I would like to argue for the idea of making the question of newness and pleasure one we ask ourselves before we make a purchase. Just like we might ask, is this dry clean only? That we start to ask, for how long will I consider this new? And how will I know when it is time to discard this? These questions can help pull decision-making out of the realm of the emotional and into the rational. Setting for ourselves an attainable, objective standard of newness, and for when something is no longer going to be useful, can be a way to grow in virtue, and be a small but effective way to get practice in living out our ideal lives. On that list of 101 virtues that I submitted to you, we have 49 of them which are oriented towards things. That's nearly half of the virtues which are involved in our relationship to things. Remember what we said that sexuality involved more than a third of all of our virtues? Well, our relationship to stuff blows that out of the water. It seems like if we want to start living lives that we won't regret, one easy place to start is in our relationship to our stuff. First, let's talk about setting a standard for newness. We take care of new things, or at least things that are new to us, better than we take care of things that have been in our possession for a long time. This is inevitable. Familiarity breeds contempt, as they say. Honestly, if when we were at Target drooling over their adorable new seasonal placemats and napkins, we had stopped to consider how long we would consider these new and adorable, I wonder if we might not have decided to not spend that $20 for something that we would have used once and then never gotten out again. This question can prompt us to frugality, and it can prompt us to choose simplicity. And in case you were wondering, simplicity and frugality are virtues. Setting an objective, traceable standard can be the little push we need to take better care of what we own. This is the essence of the virtue of stewardship, taking care of what we are responsible for. It's also about diligence and discipline, actually buckling down and doing what needs to get done to take care of those things. Now, admittedly, this means you have to be willing to be your own inner bean counter with a system to follow up on your objectives. For example, I have my closet inventory, which keeps me honest about how much I spend on my wardrobe and how often I wear the things in it. I established for myself in my own wardrobe that an item in my wardrobe is new until it is at a cost per wear of €1. This means that if something costs me, out of pocket, $20, I have to wear it 20 times before I won't consider it new anymore. If I pick something up at the thrift store for only $3, I only have to wear it 3 times before it's not considered objectively new to me anymore. Just because something isn't new according to the rule I set for myself, it doesn't mean I won't wear it anymore or won't take care of it anymore. But it's an attitude. It's a kind of respect for the item. Is it incredibly frustrating when a small child goes nuts with a permanent marker and accidentally marks my only worn 6-time 10-year-old sweater? Why, yes. Yes, it is. But you cannot imagine how determined a fairy godmother can be to find every possible solution for removing permanent marker from something that is still considered new. There is no hard and fast answer for how long something is new or how long it continues to procure pleasure for you. But for sure, the answer is not in how much it costs. One possible answer might be found in how you care for what you own. My husband and I bought ourselves a set of really nice sheets for our 23rd anniversary last year. When I picked them out, the sales lady said to me, "You'll still be using those in 23 years from now." I have to admit, I had a hard time imagining myself 23 years in the future. But the idea that if I took really good care of them, those sheets would still be around in 23 years, it made me really happy. I still, 1 year later after I bought them, call them our new sheets. And I intend to do so for at least another 4 years. I figure that 5 years is a good number for a set of sheets to still be new. All of this to say, when you set an objective rule for yourself about how you want to take care of your stuff, believe it or not, you're being virtuous. It seems really, really simple, but in this small way, being virtuous is actually not as hard as it might seem otherwise. We are not talking about pursuing a monastic, minimalist lifestyle. We're just talking about respecting what is already in our possession. I came across a definition of contentment from St. Augustine, which kind of sums up part of what I want to say about this. To be satisfied is to want what we already have. This does not come naturally to us. Novelty does something incredibly pleasant to our brains, but there are ways that we can trigger those novelty pathways other than by adding to our otherwise already full closets and homes. And some of these ways might even give us a little shot of unexpected joy.
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager. Et tout simplement de sourire, aimer.
During my epically long dive into our closets earlier this year, I talked about something called the seasonal changeover, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the process of storing away out-of-season clothes until the next time they're needed. This year in France has been surprisingly temperate, and here we are, the beginning of May, and I'm only now able to put away my super warm sweaters. Last fall, I had stored away my summer dresses and summery tops and my bathing suit and my cover-up and my flip-flops. And in order to make room for my sweaters, I needed to empty out the drawer where my summer stuff had been living. In the process, I rediscovered my summer things. I rediscovered with surprising delight the famous bathrobe blouse. I'll link to an article about it in the show notes. Or another homemade blouse I had created out of a baby swaddle because I loved the fabric so much. It's like I had forgotten these things even existed, and suddenly they were mine to love again. This last weekend, I sat outside a bouncy castle sketching out different outfit combinations and thinking about color schemes. At a skate park, whilst my boys were flying over ramps on their dirt bikes, I sewed snaps onto the décolleté of my swaddle blouse to make it a little less va-va-va-voom. Incidentally, funny story, at one point I had to fix the derailleur on my littlest bike, and I had to do it with one hand so that I wouldn't get my sewing fingers filthy and thereby ruin my blouse. On Monday, I went to the circus wearing that blouse, which incidentally, when I had made it 2 years ago, I gave it a name. I called it Snow White Goes to the Circus. I'll link a photo of it to the show notes too. I myself wonder sometimes if I'm crazy or if this is just my way of loving what I already own. I mean, I know I'm crazy. A long time ago, before we had children, back when I was teaching English at different business schools here in town, I would plan my outfits at least a month in advance to ensure that I never wore the same thing twice with the same students. This insanity was replete with little sketches of the outfits and a little calendar that I made for myself. So yes, I have always been particularly interested in this topic, but nonetheless, the seasonal changeover gave me the feeling that I had been gifted all these new things that I had forgotten about. Things that I almost never wore last year, but that I didn't have the heart to discard then. So another way of creating novelty, and I hesitate to suggest this because it can be a slippery slope, but I somehow ended up with a million styling hacks, those videos in my TikTok feed about like how to tie this, that, and 30 different ways to tie a pashmina or how to style a mini scarf. I say this is a slippery slope because the difference between being inspired by these creative solutions and actually doing them with the items already in our possession can be pretty stark. We have to be willing to silo our thoughts into how we can use these ideas with what we already own and not start dreaming of hitting the nearest accessory shop for an ultra lightweight oversized scarf. But what these videos did for me was to help me fall in love again with an extremely sentimental Bob Mackie scarf given to me by my favorite professor when I graduated from college. This scarf, you may remember, I knew that I could never part with it, but I just never wore it. So I used to line my underwear drawer with it so that I would see it every day. And this is how it has been for years. Years, I tell you. Well, after watching those videos, I figured out how to actually wear that scarf. Wear it as a shrug, which honestly must be how it was designed to be worn, because I have been stopped how many times now? 10? 10 times on the street while I've been wearing it to be told that it was exquisite. Their words, not mine. This 22-year-old scarf, which has been living in my underwear drawer for like 15 of those years, is suddenly a novelty, and it scratches that itch for newness. There is another way to fall in love with what you already own, but I have to introduce you to the main characters of the story first. There is an old French song by a singer named Charles Trenet. It's called Maman pique et papa coud, which means that mom punches the holes and dad sews. All of this in reference to leatherworking, and this was literally what my husband lived with during his childhood. While my husband and his siblings were growing up, my in-laws had a small business making fur-lined baby shoes in a workshop set up in an extra room in their very old farmhouse. They would sell these adorable little works of art at the super chic ski resorts to the ultra-wealthy. It was a family business, and it was a ton of work, working all hours of the day and night. And unfortunately, it was too much work and not enough revenue to be sustainable. My father-in-law went on to make handbags for Louis Vuitton, retiring from this job about 20 years ago. He knows his stuff when it comes to leather, until only a few years ago when he sold all of his material to a shoemaker cousin. He had all of the leatherworking machinery, the cutting tools, the hole punches, the sewing machine that he and my mother-in-law used to make those baby shoes. He has made each one of us in the family some kind of leather accessory over the years that we each faithfully use because of its sheer practicality and its beauty. I have a little leather agenda cover that I use every single day. This thing is more than 40 years old. It was originally used by my husband when he was in middle school. My boys have a little leather money purse, each one of them. I have come to view these items as practical family heirlooms, items which have stories and a personal connection that make them valuable to us. The philosopher Prince and I have been married for 24 years, and we have lived in France for the last 15 of those years. I cannot count, since we've lived back in France, how many times my father-in-law has fixed something for me. He can easily look at something and know if it can be repaired or not, and maybe he could have repaired my concrete shoes, for all I know, and really, until recently, he had all of the tools to fix it. It was like having my own shoe and handbag repair shop. Once, my mother-in-law and I had picked up a vintage leather bag at a thrift store for 50 cents. My father-in-law replaced the handles on the bag, redid the lining, and that thing was better than new. It was fabulous. I used it faithfully until my eldest child was born, when it became complicated to carry around a handled purse. Right now, at this very moment, that handbag is being used to store our doctor's kit with the toy thermometers and the stethoscopes and the eye patches and the empty bottles of vitamins. From time to time, my father-in-law will still pull out accessories that he has from his business. Recently, it was a ginormous box of every single possible color shoelace, which he offered up to the Wool is Cool project I'm doing with wool at my boys' school as closures for the gift wrapping on our little Mother's Day gifts, or yards and yards and yards of handbag lining, likewise to be used for our project. Whatever tool or accessory he doesn't have to solve a shoe or a handbag problem that falls within his scope, he makes it his mission to obtain. This is the same father-in-law who went on a day-long odyssey to look for a specific red shoe polish for my favorite red leather heels, returning home like a superhero. And I've said this before about my father-in-law, back when we were talking about giving gifts according to the love languages, but my father-in-law shows love by performing acts of service, specifically using his expertise to help out those he loves. He's not the kind of person who will ever sit down with you and have a heart-to-heart, but he will make those 13-year-old red Mary Janes shine like they were brand spanking new. Learning to see this as an expression of affection was one of the biggest eye-openers of my life, but I digress. My in-laws have been a tremendous influence on me when it comes to the value and the virtue of stewardship. They are the very embodiment of taking care of what we own. Growing up where I did, in the culture that I grew up in, I have maybe a vague memory of my father getting his shoes polished. My mother sewed most of my clothes when I was little, always with a little doll dress to match. I would make my mother sew lace onto my swimsuits when I was a toddler so that I would find it acceptable to wear, because you know how I feel about lace. But I don't ever have the memory of us really repairing things. It was a different time. There was so much abundance around us. Why get something fixed when you can just get something new, right? So let's continue my story. When my second child was near coming into this world, my eldest was not yet walking. I remember wondering how in the world I was going to deal with two babies, one a little more than a year, and the other a newborn, neither who walked. I worried about this for a long time. The traditional diaper bag was too big and too unwieldy to throw over shoulder while carrying two non-walking children. My options were not satisfying. Even though it was very much not stylish, I bought a nice-sized leather backpack. It was a good quality backpack, but it was very basic. Like basic, tan, leather. I was in a hurry and I knew I would need both hands to tend to my children, so I didn't take much time to ask the questions like, how long will this bag be new to me? Or how will I know that it is time to retire this bag? It was one that was big enough to carry 2 different sized diapers, some wipes, and an extra onesie and a pair of socks for each young man, and all of my usual stuff. By some miracle, my eldest child started walking the day I brought my youngest child home from the maternity ward, but I was still so glad that I had that backpack. I used it every single day throughout their babyhood. It went out of circulation for a while. When the boys started going to school all day, I was given a little Armani purse as a hand-me-down, which I carried faithfully until my youngest child accidentally dumped an entire Orangina into it. Am I bitter? No. Of course I'm not bitter. Forgiveness. Recently, while figuring out how to rescue my Armani purse from the evils of Orangina, I got back out that leather backpack. And I saw that after all those years of being a good old-fashioned workhorse, it had fallen into disrepair. The leather was dry and cracked. The little rope that tightens the opening, it was completely worn out, and it looked bad. I mean, like, maybe it's time to throw this out bad. And yet, I had this little spark of nostalgia when I remembered how that bag went with us everywhere in those early years. I've told you that the first years of my boys' lives are a fog of stress, depression, and fatigue. I have few good memories of that time, but this sad, dried-out little husk of a backpack never failed me. And somehow that made it impossible for me to let go of it. So I decided I wanted to honor it for being there for me. We went on vacation to my in-laws a couple of weeks ago. I presented the backpack to my mother-in-law and to my father-in-law, and I asked them what they thought. Was it even worth trying? They both agreed that it looked like it was in pretty bad shape, but my father-in-law remarked on the craftsmanship, and my mother-in-law pointed out what a perfect size it is. Let's see what we can do, my father-in-law said. So my mother-in-law scrounged up a new cord to close the bag. Already, just that little touch made the bag look less sad. My father-in-law went into his Alibaba's cave of leather care products, and he got out a more than 40-year-old bottle of lanolin-based leather cream. He said to warm it up first and then slather it on and see if that helped. So I did. Sure, it smelled horrendous, but the difference was astonishing, I tell you. Like, I never had thought this bag was even remotely aesthetically pleasing before, but suddenly it looked great. After it got its lanolin treatment, I decided to waterproof it with some spray I had sitting around. And I was so pleased, and I remember thinking, boy, oh boy, all this time I had this beautiful bag, and I had no idea. Suddenly, I was experiencing St. Augustine's missive about contentment. Satisfaction is wanting what you already possess. Now, am I fortunate because I have a family who can look at this kind of thing and know exactly what it would take to make it brand new? Yes. But back when I was doing my Buy No Clothes in 2021 challenge, I ended up befriending our local shoe repair shop guy, who I lovingly referred to as Rumpelstiltskin, because of what I like to call the saga of the elf boots. It's a long story, but in the end, the local shoe repair shop guy might not be able to bring things out of his Alibaba cavern to give me to try out, but he would probably rather make a few bucks off me. But if it will save me from spending $100 on a pair of new boots when I have a pair that I love but needs a $20 repair job, it's a relationship worth pursuing, and even maybe worth enriching Rumpelstiltskin for. The extra effort, that little bit of elbow grease to invest in what we already own to take care of it, can bring us profound satisfaction. And it's a virtuous cycle. Once I had this little taste of satisfaction, it's like it opened my eyes to other little things that were within my power to repair or refresh. I took my seemingly endless pile of little boy pants that needed patches, and I decided to turn them into jogging shorts for the summer, much to their delight. I fixed a hem on a skirt that was falling out. I washed the windows. I'm telling you, each time it felt like I had something new and fancy and fabulous, and it felt amazing. Try this. Try investing a little time and energy into what you already own and see if you don't get some kind of satisfaction from it. Don't start with the windows. That was just momentum for me. But start with something small, a leather wallet and some polish, and see if it doesn't spark a little joy for you too. Well, it looks like I've gone long yet again today, but I want to check in with my efforts to live out the golden rule this year, which was my New Year's resolution. This will be quick because it's an update on something I told you about a few weeks ago. I had told you that my youngest and I took a bouquet of tulips to a neighbor who was going through chemo. I admitted to you that I was doing it out of guilt because I knew that she was lonely. But I also knew that I would be thrilled if someone brought me a bouquet of seasonal flowers. So I figured that I was living out the golden rule, right? Right. So here's what happened. When I pick up my kids from school at lunchtime, I often pick up 2 other kids also because their mom gets off work right at the time that school lets out. So I hang out with these kids, we play I Spy, and we climb trees until she can get there. Well, on this particular day, when their mom arrived, she arrived with an absolutely breathtaking bouquet of seasonal flowers. And to my astonishment, she handed it to me. I couldn't help but remember how I had actually articulated that thought. I would be thrilled if someone gave me a bouquet of seasonal flowers, and I'll be darned, I was. So, note to self, while there may not always be a one-to-one relationship between doing for others what I would want done for me, and others doing for me what I would want done for me, when there is that one-to-one relationship, it feels like the universe spins around me. And that is enough to want to keep stumbling through my awkward attempts to love others as I love myself. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I want to give a great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro to the show, and to Claude Ekwe who wrote it, and Matt Kugler who sang it. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.